This audiovisual material was produced and published by 100 Books Collection.
Practice daily. Do your research and change your life for the better. How to Change the Feeling of I. Neville Goddard, 1953. For those of you who were not present last Sunday, let me give you a quick summary of the thought expressed here. We stated that the world was a manifestation of consciousness, that the environment, circumstances, and living conditions of the individual were only the outward representation of the particular state of consciousness in which that individual dwells. Therefore, the individual sees what he is by virtue of the state of consciousness from which he sees the world. Any attempt to change the outer world before changing the inner structure of his mind is working in vain. Everything happens in order. Those who help or hinder us, whether they know it or not, are the servants of that law, which constantly molds outer circumstances into harmony with our inner nature. Last Sunday, we asked you to distinguish between individual identity and the state they occupy. The individual identity is the Son of God. Is that I speak of you or to you, or do I speak of myself? I really mean our imagination. That is permanent. It merges with the state and believes itself to be the state with which it merges. But at each moment in time, it is free to choose the state with which it will identify itself. And that brings us to today's topic, changing the feeling of self. And I hope I don't get the same reaction that is recorded in the 6th chapter of John's Gospel. For we are told that when this was given to the world, they all forsook him, leaving only a handful behind. For when he told them that there was no one to change but oneself, they said, "This is a hard teaching. It is a hard thing. Who can listen to it?" Because he said, "No one comes to me unless I call him." And then it is recorded when he repeated it 3 times they left him, never to walk with him again. And turning to the few who remained, he asked them, "Will you also go?" And they answered, "To whom would we go? You have the word of eternal life." In other words, it is much easier when I can blame someone else for my misfortune. But now that I am told that no one comes to me unless I call him, that I am the sole artificer of my fortunes and misfortunes, it is a hard saying, and so it is recorded. It is a hard saying. Who can hear it? Who can understand it? And who will believe it? And then he said, "And now I sanctify myself, so that they also may sanctify themselves through the truth, because if this is the truth, then there is no one to change, no one to heal, no one to purify but oneself." And so we start with the self. Most of us are totally unaware of the self that we really cherish. We have never taken a good look at the self, so we don't know it, because the I has no face, shape, or form, but it molds itself into a structure by all that it consents to, all that it believes, and few of us really know what we believe. We have no idea of the innumerable superstitions and prejudices that mold this inner, formless I into a shape, which is then projected as man's environment, as the conditions of life. Read it carefully when you go home. "No one comes to me without my calling. You have not chosen me, I have chosen you. No one can take my life from me. I lay it down myself. No power can take from me anything that is part of the inner arrangement of my mind. All that you gave me I have kept, and nothing is lost except the son of perdition or belief in God. And because nothing can be lost but belief in loss, I will not now take upon myself the loss of anything that you have given me that is good. And so I sanctify myself that they may be sanctified through the truth." And now, how do we go about changing the I? First of all, we must discover the I, and we do this by uncritical observation of oneself. This will reveal to you a self that will shock you. You will be utterly, I would not say frightened, but ashamed to admit that you have ever known such a low creature. And if it had been God himself who had approached you in this despicable form, you would have denied it 1,000 times before a single rooster crowed. You could not believe that this is the self you have carried with you and protected and excused and justified. Then you begin to change this self after. By uncritical observation, you make the discovery of that self. For the acceptance of the self is the essence of the moral problem of the world. It is the epitome of a true perspective on life, because it is the sole cause of everything you observe. Your description of the world is a confession of the self you do not know. You describe another, you describe society, you describe anything, and your description of what you observe reveals to the one who knows this law the self that you really are. So you must first accept yourself. When that self is accepted, then you can begin to change. It is much easier to take the virtues of the gospel and apply them as a word of life to love the enemy, to bless those who curse us, and to feed the hungry. But when man discovers that the being to be fed, the being to be clothed, the being to be sheltered, the greatest enemy of all is that self, then he is ashamed, utterly ashamed that that is the being, for it was easier to share with another something I possess, to take an extra coat and give it to another. But when I know the truth, it is not that. I begin with the self, having discovered, and I begin with the change of that self. Now let me tell you a story. Some years ago in this city, I was giving a series of lectures near that lake. I don't even remember the name of the lake, but it was something like Parkview Manor, the place where I spoke, and in that auditorium there was a gentleman who was seeking an audience before the meeting. We walked across the street to the little park, and he told me he had an unsolvable problem. I said, "There are no such things as insoluble problems." "But," he said, "you don't know my problem. It's not a state of health, I assure you. It's look at the skin I'm wearing." I said, "What's wrong with it? It looks beautiful to me." He replied, "Look at the pigment in my skin. I, by accident of birth, am now discriminated against. Opportunities to progress in this world are denied me just because of the accident of birth, because I was born colored. Opportunities to progress in every field, neighborhoods where I would like to live and raise a family I could not move to, where I would like to open a business I could not set up in that area." Then I told him about my personal experience, that I came to this country. I didn't have that problem, but I was a foreigner in the midst of all Americans. I didn't find it difficult. "However," he reminded me, "that's not my problem, Neville. Others have come here speaking with an accent, but they don't have my skin, and I was born an American." Then I told him about an experience of mine in New York. If I were asked to name a man I would consider my teacher, I would name Abdullah. I studied with that gentleman for 5 years. He had the same skin color, the same pigment as this gentleman. He never allowed anyone to refer to him as a colored man. He was very proud of being black and did not want any modification of what God had done to him. He turned to me and said, "Have you ever seen a painting of the Sphinx?" I replied, "Yes." He said, "It represents the 4 fixed quarters of the universe. You have the lion, the eagle, the bull, and the man. And here is the man who is the head." The crown of that creature called the Sphinx, which still defies man's knowledge to decipher, was crowned with a human head. And look carefully at the head, Neville, and you will see that whoever fashioned that head must have been a Negro. Whoever modeled it had a black face, and if that still defies man's ability to unravel it, I'm very proud to be black. I have seen scientists, doctors, lawyers, bankers from all walks of life seek an audience with old Abdullah, and all who came considered themselves honored to be admitted to his house and to receive an interview. If he was ever invited out, and he was always the guest of honor. He said, "Neville, you must first begin with yourself. Find yourself. Never be ashamed of the being you are. Discover it and begin the change of that self." Well, I told this gentleman exactly what Abdullah had taught me, that there was no cause outside the disposition of his own mind. If he was discriminated against, it was not because of the pigment of his skin, although he showed me signs as big as all the outdoors denying him access to a certain area. The sign is there only because in the minds of some men such patterns are formed and attract to themselves what they would now condemn, that there is no power outside the mind of man to do anything to man, and he, by the arrangement of his own mind, by indulging these restrictions in his cradle and being conditioned slowly through his youth, awakening to adulthood believing himself established, would have to be established, but no one comes to me without my calling. Then someone comes to condemn or to praise. They cannot come unless I call them. Not a man named Neville, but that secret being who is not named Neville. The secret being that is the sum total of all my beliefs, all the things that I consent to, that form a pattern of structure. That secret being draws to itself things in harmony with itself. Well, that man went off and struggled with himself. He couldn't believe everything I told him, not that night, but last Sunday morning in the lobby. He came over and we renewed the friendship. He took me aside to show me the fruit of this teaching. He said, "Neville, it took me almost 3 years to really get over that fixed idea that I, by accident of birth, would be a secondary citizen, but I got over it. Now here is my office on Wilshire Boulevard. I chose this one not because it was the only one I was offered. I was offered 4 equally wonderful locations. I chose this one because it had more telephone facilities, but the others were just as good." Here is my office. I could not judge my income by this office, nice as it is. Everything is nice in it. But Neville, this year I'll make $250,000. Well, in America, that's still a fabulous sum of money. It would be amazing anywhere else in the world. But even in fabulous America, a man who makes $250,000 is really at the top. And that was the man who a few years ago told me that the whole vast world was against him because of the accident of his birth. Now he knows that he is what he is by virtue of the state of consciousness with which he identifies, and the choice is his, to go back to the restrictions of his childhood when he believed the story, or to continue in the freedom he has found. So you and I can be anything in this world that we wish to be if we clearly define our purpose in life and constantly attend to that purpose. It must be habitual. The noble concept we have of ourselves should not be put on us just for a moment and taken off when we leave this church. We feel free here. We feel that we have something in common. That is why we are here, but are we going to put on the noble concept we now have of ourselves when we walk through the door and enter that bus? Or are we going to go back to the restrictions we had before we came here? The choice is ours, and the hardest lesson to learn is that there is no one in this world who can be drawn into your world unless you, and only you, call them in. So do not do what they did thousands of years ago, for that is the beginning of secession from the great truth. So we are told that they turned away from it, never to walk with it again, and the few who remained did not like it either. But where would they go if this is the word of eternal truth? Not that it is true for these times, but if this is the law of being, and in all dimensions of my being it holds, if this is eternally true, then let me learn the lesson now, though I struggle with myself as he did for 3 years. Thus the change of the feeling of I is a selective thing, because the unenumerated states are infinite states, but the I is not the state. The I believes it is the state when it enters and merges with it, so it was presented with a state, and without the faculty of discrimination in its youth, it merged with the state and believed that these restrictions were true, and it took 3 years to disentangle the I from these fixed ideas that it had lived with for so many years. Now you can take just a moment, or you can also take your 3 years. I can't tell you how long it will take, but I will tell you one thing. It can be measured by the feeling of naturalness. You can carry a feeling until it becomes natural. The moment the feeling becomes natural, it will start to bear fruit within your world. So I told this story at a small meeting here in town, and not many people asked questions about it, but 3 people asked, "But he must have had money before, surely he knew the right people. Somehow he must have had some substance to begin with, because how can you go out and lend $100 million and call that a real fact that you have that to lend, and tell me that you didn't have somebody who had it or that you didn't have it yourself?" I didn't ask the gentleman about the individual facts of the case. I went into the office, I saw him, I didn't look at his books. He volunteered this information and gave me the figure of $250,000 net for the year. I have not checked or verified the statement in any way. I believe it implicitly. But I will not agree with those who believe that unless you have certain things to start with, you cannot apply this law. You can start now from scratch and choose the being you want to be. You are not going to change the pigment of your skin, but you will find that your accent, or the pigment of your skin, or your so-called racial origin, will not be a hindrance, because if a man is ever hindered, it can only be the state of consciousness in which he remains that hinders him. Man is liberated or constrained by reason of the state of consciousness in which he persists. If he persists in it, well, then I will say, he persists in it. But I warn him that nobody cares, and that is a terrible blow when a man discovers that nobody except himself really cares. So we find ourselves weeping with ourselves in the hope of getting others to weep with us. And what a terrible blow when the day comes when we discover that no one ever really cared. They'll listen to us for a moment as they walked by, but they didn't really care about us. When we make that discovery, we shake ourselves and boldly take ownership of the gift our Father gave us before the world existed. Let me show you the gift. You have read your Lord's Prayer possibly every day, but you have read it as a prayer from a translation of a translation that does not reveal the meaning of the evangelist. The true translation you will find in the work of Farrar Fenton, where in the original it is written in the passive imperative mood, which is like a standing command, a thing to be done absolutely and continually. So now you can consider your universe as a vast, interwoven machinery in which all things happen. There is nothing to do. All things are happening, so it is written this way. Your will must be done. Your kingdom must be restored. That is the only way it could be expressed if the passive imperative mood were expressed. But from the Latin from which our translation was made, there is no first aorist of the passive imperative mood. So we have it in the form in which we have it, but it does not reveal the intent of the mysteries. If you see that all things are now, you do not become, you simply select the state you want to occupy. In occupying it, it appears that you become, but it is already a fact, every aspect of that state in its minutest detail. It is elaborated and taking place. In occupying the state, you seem to go through the action of unfolding that state, but the state is completely finished and taking place. So now you can choose the self you want to be, and by choosing a self other than the one you are expressing now, you begin the change of the feeling of I. Now, how will I know that I have changed the feeling of I? Beginning first with an uncritical observation of my reactions to life, and then noticing my reactions when I believe I am identified with my choice. If I start from the assumption that I am the man I want to be, let me observe my reactions. If they are as they were, I have not identified with my choice, for my reactions are automatic. Therefore, if I were to change, my reactions to life would automatically change. So the change of the feeling of I results in a change of reaction, which change of reaction is a change of environment and behavior. But let me warn you now, a small alteration of mood is not a transformation, it is not a true change of consciousness. For as my mood changes for the moment, it can be quickly and rapidly, I would say, replaced by another mood in reverse. When I say I changed, as that gentleman changed his mood, his basic mood, his state of consciousness, it means that having assumed that I am what the moment denied, what my reason denied, that I remain in that state long enough for that state to be stable, so that all my energies flow from that state. I am no longer thinking in that state, I am thinking from that state. So when a state becomes so stable as to definitely expel all its rivals, then that central, habitual state of consciousness, from which I think defines my character, and is really a true transformation or change of consciousness. When I reach that state of stability, observe how my world is then molded in harmony with this inner change. And men will come into my world, people will come to help, and they will think they are initiating the impulse to help. They are just playing their part. They must do what they do, because I have done what I did. Having gone from one state to the other, I have altered my relationship to the world around me, and that change in relationship forces a change in behavior with respect to my world. So they have to act differently towards me. So in changing the I, you start with desire, which we will develop and elaborate on tomorrow night. So you start with desire. Desire is the spring of action, because you have to want to be different from what you are. We fail because we are not in love enough with an idea. We are not, I would say, moved enough to want to be other than what we are. If I could get you to fall completely in love with some state to the point that it would haunt the mind, I could almost prophesy that in the not-too-distant future you would externalize that state into your world. And the reason we fail is that we are not hungry enough to change, because we either don't know the law, or we don't have the drive or the hunger to actually bring about the change. Because the change of the feeling of I results in the change of reaction, which change of reaction results in a change of world. If you like your world and are complacent with it, you have not begun the way of the mysteries, for the first beatitude appeals to the one who is not complacent. Blessed are the poor in spirit. You must be poor in spirit, not complacent, not satisfied. The man who thinks that by reason of birth, the religion he inherited at birth is enough for me, who is not dissatisfied, is not, I would say, moved that being is complacent, and therefore not poor in spirit. He is very rich in spirit. His is not the kingdom of God. For if I could move you, make you dissatisfied with yourself, then you would recognize that self and set about changing it. For the only field of activity for man is within himself and upon himself. One does not work on the other. The day you change yourself, that day you will change your world. Now I see that my time is fast running out. And so, in the minute I have left here, let me not urge you, because if you come to the meeting tomorrow night without much hunger, you will not benefit. But I hope many of you will be there. Even if you are encouraged to the point of attempting, I would say, to refute what I have told you, I would accept that challenge, because in attempting to refute it, I know that if you were sincere in your attempt, you would prove it. So I hope that many of you will come and enjoy this party with us. We are here in town at the Ebel for 15 nights, Monday through Friday, as Mr. Smith told you, for 3 consecutive weeks. If you can't attend them all, and I hope many of you will, pick and choose the titles that appeal to you the most. Tomorrow night for me is basic. It's the importance of defining a purpose in this world, having a goal, because without a goal you have no direction. And you were warned in the book, or I would say, in the Epistle of James, that the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Let not such a man think that he will receive anything from the Lord, for he is like a wave that is driven and tossed by the wind. Such a man never reaches his goal. So you must have a goal, and tomorrow night we will show you the importance of defining desire. There are certain schools that teach you to kill desire. We teach you to intensify desire, and we show you the reason for such teaching. We show you what the Bible teaches about desire. And now we will move on to the help that many of you have asked for today. Those of you who were not here on Sunday, let me remind you that this is a very simple technique. As I told you on Sunday, every time you exercise your imagination, and you do so lovingly on behalf of another, you are mediating God to man. So we sit in silence and simply become imitators of our Father, and He called the world into existence by being what He would call. So we sit and listen as if we hear someone congratulating us on finding what we are looking for. So we go to the end of the matter, and we listen as if we hear, and we look as if we see, and we try in this way to feel just in the situation of our answered prayer. And there we wait in the silence just about 2 minutes, and then the lights will go down to help you. And let me remind you that if you want to clear your throat, please do so. If you want to change your position in the chair, please do so. Feel like you're home alone, because if you don't, and try not to disturb your neighbor, you won't be able to exercise your imagination on anyone's behalf. So now I will take the chair and just listen carefully, as if you will listen. I will make you this promise. The day you become very still in your mind and really become attentive, you will hear, as if it is coming from outside, what you are actually whispering from inside you. Thank you for loyally listening to 100 Books Collection. With your support, we are able to create more and more life-changing materials for every soul on earth.